To make this a little bit easier to test out, before we go anywhere, I'm going to come over to our globals just here, and I'm going to set lives to 1, just so we only work with 1 life, and we can go ahead and check this immediately if lives is at 0. Now, when we go ahead and call that method that we've just looked at in the last part, ball lost, of course, at this point, what we want to do is before we go ahead and update the lives text, you could do it after this, but there's no need to update the text if the lives are at 0. We can add a little check in here and go ahead and return down here if the lives are 0. So if this game global lives is 0, we want to end the game and we want to show that end screen. So I'm going to call an end game method like so, just to keep things nice and tidy. Down here, let's go ahead and create this end game method. You might want to do other things in there, but what we now need to do is start a new state. Now by that I mean, we already know that we have a splash state, which goes ahead and shows our preloader. This is all code from the boilerplate that we downloaded. We have boot, which happens before that. Then we have game. So you can have a kind of pre-game screen where a user can click to start. That'll be pretty easy to add in if you want to go ahead and do that yourself once you have figured out what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is just copy splash. It doesn't really matter which of these states that we take. And I'm going to create a new state in here. And of course, I'm going to call this something like gameover.js. Now let's go ahead and get rid of this, and let's go ahead and get rid of this as well, because we don't want to do anything inside of here. And let's go ahead and register this. We can also get rid of the center game objects utility that's included with this boilerplate. So what we want to do is come over to our main.js file just here, and this is where our states are all registered, and we can switch between states as we need. So this can be as complicated or as easy as you like, but let's go ahead and say game over. And we're going to call this game over state, and let's pull that state in from that new file that we've just created. So game over state from game over. So we're just calling it game over state. So now that we have that new state, what we can do is over in our game, when the game ends, we can say this game state, and we can start a new state, and we've called that game over. So that's pretty much as easy as it gets. Let's just take a look at this and click to release that ball, and there we go. So we're now on the game over state. But of course we want to show that the game is over. We want to give some text in here. We already know how to build text, so have a go at doing that yourself if you want to. Otherwise I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this now. Now we don't need to preload anything in here, so we can go ahead and just get rid of that and stick it up there. And create is the point where we want to add this text. So we're going to go ahead and create some text. We're just going to say this add text, really simple. We want this to be in the center of the screen, so we can do that using the methods that we saw before, or we can say this game width times 0.5 and this game height times 0.5, and we can go ahead and add in our object of our font, which is really simple. We already know how to do this, so let's say 24 pixels Arial. Let's go ahead and fill this with pure black. Let's go ahead and align this centrally, like so, and then down here what we can do is say text anchor set 0.5, and that's just going to go ahead and anchor that so we can position it centrally. We'll have a look at that in just a second. So let's go ahead and end the game, and there we go. So at the moment we didn't supply the other parameter in here that we require, so we're just seeing a object representation, but this is essentially going to be this argument here. It's going to be something like game over, and we're going to show some details. So again, if I just go ahead and click, there we go. So right in the center of the screen we have game over. Now just to go kind of give you an idea of what happens if we don't set this anchor, and go ahead and click like so, we see the following. So it's a little bit off center, so that's why we set that anchor, and then we go ahead and set this based on half of the width of the game. Of course you could do divided by 2 if you wanted to. That's going to work in exactly the same way. Let's just go ahead and check that out very quickly, like so. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do then is the text. So let's go ahead and add some backticks here so we can insert some variables. We're going to say game over. We're going to go down a couple of new lines, and we're going to say you reached level X with a score, or with score X. So let's give that a refresh. Go ahead and make sure we can end this game. And there we go. So that's exactly what we want to see. Now we know that because we set these as globals, it's going to be as easy as saying this game global level, and the same for score. So this game global score. And now that should give us the level and the score, which of course is pretty appalling. Okay, so the only issue with this now is we can't really go anywhere. So I can click here, but nothing is happening. So what we want to do is add a event handler here. So when on our input, we see a down button clicked, we want to go ahead and add an event handler, and that is going to be this restart game. Again, just extracting this out to another method, passing the current game instance in, and down here what we're going to do is say restart game, like so, and we're just going to go and say this game state start game. So we're pretty much just going back to the state that we left. So we're transferring over to this state and then back to the game state. So if now I go ahead and lose the game purposely, we see the following. When I click, we're back to the game. Now there's a couple of issues with this. First of all, you'll have noticed that lives is 0. So let's just go and set our lives back to 3 over in our defaults just here. And let's go ahead and lose this game a few times. You can see the scores at 10, 20, and lives are now at 0. So that's ended the game level 1 with a score of 30. When I click, we still have the same score. We still have 0 lives. And if the level had have incremented, that's going to also be the same value. Now the reason for this is because we're setting these as globals, we're not resetting them when we just switch a state. So it's important that what we do is when we restart the game, we reset them global variables to what they were before. Now just to remind you of how this worked, if we just go over to our boot, we remember when we created our boot screen, we initialized the global variables by cloning that default globals. Really, the reason that we put these inside of their own file is because we need to do pretty much this same thing again over on our game over screen when we restart. So what we want to do is go ahead and just do exactly the same thing. You can put this elsewhere, but I prefer just to do this just in case you were keeping track of how many games had been played. You could switch these around, it's entirely up to you. So this game global, and we clone globals. So over in game over, let's go up and import clone from Lodash, so we can go ahead and make use of cloning that object. Down here in restart game, let's extract this out to a new method actually. So we're going to say reset global variables. Let's go ahead and create this reset global variables method, and we just want to go ahead and reset that to the cloned version of globals. And again, we want to pull globals into here. So let's go ahead and import globals from, and we go into globals and index. Okay, so now what's going to happen is that's going to clone that object, the default state of it, remember. That's why we're cloning it, because we're taking the default score of 0, default level of 1, and default lives of 3. So if I go ahead and lose a few times just by incrementing my score along the way, like so, when we lose and we click, that's going to reset that score, reset our lives, and also reset our level as well.